Okay, I'm going to be meandering across the path of our former speaker a little bit. I want to reinforce some of the things that he said. He was talking about the overwashing flood in Mosul, remember? There's a word for that. He used the word overwashing flood, right? Didn't you? Overrunning. Okay, guess what the word for that is in Greek? You're going to love this. Cataclysm. Yeah, cataclysm is an overwashing flood. Of course, if you're on the right side of it, it's a good thing, isn't it? A washing away can be a great thing. But if you're on the wrong side of it, it can be devastating, can't it? And he also talked about the cloud of Ezekiel, right? The word for that in Arabic or Hebrew is Shoah, and it means Holocaust. So that cloud that Ezekiel saw with the thundering and the lightning and the angel and the radiance was the cloud of the Holocaust. So, very serious thing. He was very sobered by it, wasn't he, when he saw it? And also, if you want to put this whole trajectory of events that we call the end times into a pretty easy to follow sequence, start with Obadiah. The reason why is because it talks about them blocking the Jewish people from escaping the destruction of Jerusalem at the crossings of the Jordan River. And you think about it, the individuals that were doing this blocking were the Edomites, descendants of Israel's own brother. Their animosity was so ingrained that 400 years passed by and most of them had never seen somebody from Israel. And when they tried to cross the land during the time after the Exodus, they said, if you even touch one toe in our land, we'll come out and slaughter all of you. That's vindictiveness, isn't it? Malevolency at the highest possible level, ingrained in them for 400 years. And they had never even seen an Israeli, most of them in their life, because they were in Egypt. Where did that come from? And so in the talk about in Obadiah, they're trying to escape the destruction of Jerusalem. And while they're shouting, burn it down, they're blocking the escape of the people who survived the slaughter. And this is up close and personal. This is intimacy, betrayal at the intimate level. Your own next door neighbor who spoke the same language and ate at the same restaurant and wore the same clothes as you did is the one that's calling to the Babylonian soldiers, there's a Jew, kill him. That's just like in Nazi Germany. That's Obadiah. That's the level of intensity. And then the next level out, like a target, is Psalm 83. You want to see the alignment of the nations that actually literally touch the border of modern-day Israel, look in Psalm 83. And do an exercise, actually list out all the names. Do that. Start with Obadiah, make a list, and then move on over to Psalm 83 and make another list. And you're going to very quickly realize, if you're not aware of it already, that there's a lot of overlap. The same cast of characters, just like a kaleidoscope, you turn it, you have a constantly changing, constantly morphing image, right? Except for one thing. It's the same little pieces of glass that are making all of the different images. Right. 25 or 30 little pieces of glass are the cast of characters for whatever image that you might happen to be seeing through that prophetic kaleidoscope, if you will. And then, of course, what he alluded to already, which is the Psalm or the Ezekiel scenario. That's Ezekiel 36 through 38. Talks about the alignment of the macro forces. The north, the south, the east, and the west. Persia, Fars. Some people here and probably know some folks from Iran, and they speak Farsi. Fars is what it's called in Ezekiel. Fars. And Rosh, to the north, the othermost parts of the north, Rosh, isn't the same as Russia. It happens to be a little bit of a verbal overlap, but it just means top or north. The four allied forces that coalesce in the Ezekiel scenario come all the way from the uttermost parts of the north. And you know that when the Bible uses those kind of adjectives, it really means uttermost. Like a strong delusion. Well, when the Bible says something's strong, it means it. When we operate in an arena in the world we live in today where there's a strong delusion, you should take it to heart. It's a strong delusion. It's like radioactivity. It'll burn you down to the ground if you start playing with it. It's very, very dangerous, potent, and toxic. Remember the Babylon, the harlot riding on the back of the beast? Do you recall what she had in her hand? Yes, and what was in the cup? What kind of wine? Wine of her fornication. Okay, stop and think about that. We water ski over these words sometimes without slowing down and looking at it. What exactly is the wine of her fornication? What is wine? Fermented grape juice. That means that actually, if you take the time to think about it, is one of the most disgusting allegories in the whole Bible. Where does she acquire the material to make the wine of her fornication? Yeah, see what I mean? It's very, very obscene. It's explicitly grotesque. And what does she do with it? She causes the inhabitants of the world to become drunk from it. That's my point. If you actually played out the allegories of the Bible, they would be X-rated in some respects. The Virgin of Zion, what was she famous for? Her harlotry. Of lying with her paramours under every tree in Israel. She didn't even try to hide it. They did it in the tops of the hills. There was no place that you could go in the land of Israel, the holy set-aside land, the promised land, the place where you could worship the Lord in spirit and truth and rejoice without being reminded constantly that your own country, the land that was promised through Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, was polluted like billboards with obscenities written on them everywhere you go on Interstate 80. There's nowhere you can get away from them. That's the picture. So tonight we're going to talk. What I'm going to try to do is lay a foundation tonight that we'll reiterate as we go through the rest of the weekend. And crossing paths, and I hope together we'll make a wall of different bricks and stones building up ourselves in the most holy faith, edifying one another. The battle is joined. Do you believe that? It's kind of obvious at this point, isn't it? Even for the non-believing world, that there are things afoot. Remember, how many are Lord of the Rings fans? Remember Gandalf, when Mordor starts acting up, he's puffing on his pipe. He says, there are things that have been set in motion that cannot be undone. Right? So in Passover, how many have participated in a Passover Seder? A few, right? There's a question in it, and that is, why is this night different than every other night? So the question we can ask ourselves is, why are these current events different than all other events? Yes, there's the usual stuff that the world has been doing since the world existed, but there are some things that are intruding themselves into what I call the global big screen, the mainstream media, that are unique because they are culminating events. They are leading us in the direction that our brother is pointing us to. You guys, look over there. What do generals do? Why are generals generals? Because they have the capacity, the ability to see over the far horizon. And not only to see it, but also to prepare for it. And that's what watchmen are. You know what the modern word for a watchman is? Whistleblower. They basically said, Haney, we're sick of listening to you blow that shofar. We're going to shut you up once and for all. So we're going to take you off the wall because you keep telling us about those darn Babylonians that are coming over the next hill. We're tired of you telling us about that. So we're going to move you off of there, and we're going to put you down on the south wall because there's nobody bad guys coming from that direction. 2 days later, I start sounding a shofar from the south wall. We thought we told you to shut up. Well, there's Tablighi Jamaat coming from that direction. Who in the world are they? Well, if you would let me, I would explain it. And finally he said, well, we had enough of you, period. We're taking you off the wall entirely. We're going to put you down in the dungeon. That'll shut you up, won't it? So they basically, what they did was they canceled my secret clearance. They took my gun. How many, by the way, have been in law enforcement or military? What does it do? What is the message that's sent if your chain of command takes your weapon from you? Like being stripped naked in public, isn't it? Boy, Haney must have really done something this time. And then they force you to walk around among your colleagues, basically semi-naked. And they cut off access to all the systems, and they sequestered me in a little bitty room for 11 months. But I took it as a sabbatical. And I just took all the paperwork that I'd accumulated for the last 15 years and literally put them in those little handy-dandy classic sleeves, you know, the organizers, put them in nice big fat binders, and arranged everything that I had into precise chronological order. And then when I did retire, which maybe I'll tell you about, part of the story, and I wrote the book over the Christmas holiday of 2015 in 17 days. 4,500 words a day for 17 days straight. And I looked like the guy from Castaway. My little Yorkie's in there, and it's just me and Alexandria, right through Christmas, right through New Year's. I didn't want to stop to eat. I didn't want to stop to go to the bathroom. I didn't want to stop to do anything. I was like driven because it was all there and it just came out. And the copy editor barely changed any of it. It's really quite remarkable. But every time there was a question, I had one of my little handy-dandy binders, and I would just go, you know, what about that memo from April 13th of 2015 or whatever it was, and there it was. Easy. And so the battle is joined. And by the way, do you recognize the ship, the bigger one? The USS Constitution. And where do you suppose it is? It's in Tripoli. Where's Tripoli? Tripoli is in the shores, it's part of Libya. Still is, it was then and it still is today. Why were they there? And it was the year 1804. This was the most dramatic intervention almost in human history, because you know what the consequences of this intervention was? It broke the back of the slave trade. 1,000 years slave trade. America sailed over to into foreign territory, trespassing in the Muslim domain, and blasted the fortress of Tripoli. That's why the Marine song is from the halls of Montezuma to the shores of Tripoli. We were involved with jihadis from the very beginning of our country's history. And the USS Constitution was built to defend the U.S. Constitution. It was the most high-tech war machine ever built. It was impervious to cannon fire. That's why it was called Old Ironsides. There was no conventional weapon that could sink it. And it's still afloat today. It's commissioned till this very day. Yep. So that's the USS Constitution, Old Ironsides, the Barbary Pirates, 1804, intervention in the slave trade. Did the slave trade end the next day? No. It took a civil war in our country, but we only had 3, I shouldn't say only, we had 3 of the approximately 20 million slaves that were in the Western Hemisphere. 10 million of them were in Brazil, and the remainder were in the Caribbean basin. We set a standard for the whole world. Why don't we treat history in that context? Yes, we had slaves, So we fought a war to end it, and meanwhile we bombarded the Barbary fortress, broke the back of the slave trade. One of the greatest deliverances of people in the history of humankind. America did that. This is where we're at, friends. Some of you probably seen this. That picture is probably taken here in Iowa somewhere. That's a formidable. Imagine being inside the middle of that, in that vortex. I have a phrase: abiding in the vortex. If the Lord puts you in the middle of the fiery furnace, or He places you in the middle of the vortex, then that's where you should stay. But you certainly can't stay there unless He puts you there. And I would not suggest that you stick your arm out into the vortex, because it'll knot right off. So, when you abide in the middle of the spiritual warfare of this level, I call it fiery lions. It's a combination of the fiery furnace and the lion's den. And my wife occasionally would ask me what it was like, and I would tell, honey, there are times when I can almost literally see the chariots of fire. That's how intense it really is. It's real for me, friends. Not theoretical, abstract. It's real. Why else would I have the motivation to travel around the country? If all I was going to do is come and tell you some bad news and tell you that there was nothing that we could do for it, or there was no hope to be found, then I would have a very short career in public speaking, wouldn't I? If you looked on the internet or the web and you saw my speeches and I was constantly saying there's no hope, Pastor wouldn't invite me to come and speak here, would you? But I'm a unique individual, and we all are, of course. We all have spiritual gifts and abilities. Each one of you here can do one particular thing better than anybody else in the whole world. And it's part of your responsibility to find out what exactly that is. That's hopefully what we'll partly accomplish here, is to encourage one another, to edify one another, to build ourselves up, because literally there is at least one thing that each one of you can do that nobody else, at the very least, nobody else can do, and probably also that you can do better than anybody else. So one of the secrets, we were talking about this word earlier. Did you know the word right there in those Greek letters? It says thlipsis. Thlipsis. Great word, isn't it? It's a tongue twister. It means affliction, confinement, hemmed in, internal pressure, narrow place, oppression. Most often we hear it translated tribulation. Restriction and without options. What it means is to be pushed over in the corner with no room to maneuver. In this world you will have much thlipsis, but do not fear, for I have overcome the world. You can live in the fiery furnace with the fiery lions if the Lord puts you there. And the secret of it, friends, is this: to find the shalom in the midst of the storm. So if you can find peace in the middle of that vortex with flashes of lightning all around you, because Satan has fallen to earth like lightning, then I believe that you're abiding in the grace of God, wouldn't you say? He's capable of protecting us no matter what situation we might find. There's nothing that people can imagine or do that surpasses the capacity of the Lord to protect us. Is there? So the point is that the natural inclination of us as people is to respond to the things that we're talking about in one of two major ways. It's our natural inclination to do it, and that is to respond either in fear or in anger. The men types, we tend to get angry. Generally what I've seen is the women types tend to get fearful. And we all do both as well. But in terms of the majority reaction. Men trying to be angry and women tend to be fearful. But actually, fear or anger is just an expression of fear. But we're not authorized, according to the Bible, to respond to the things that we see in this world either in fear or in anger, because it says that the wrath of man does not accomplish the righteousness of God. So what then shall we do, friends? And then you go back to the back of Revelation and you find that the fearful and the unbelieving are without the city. That seems awfully harsh, thought I, when I was a new baby believer. But then I realized as time went on that the reason why people who are fearful are outside the boundaries of the city is because the fear paralyzes them from doing what they know is right, like the rich young ruler. What was he afraid of? Losing something. Why do politicians in Washington make promises and then go there and don't fulfill their promises? They're afraid. What are they afraid of? Afraid of losing prestige, position, admiration, and power. All of that. A toxic brew, remember? Mystery Babylon? Yeah. Don't drink out of it. If you do, you're very likely going to become intoxicated and stagger about. And who is he that has wounds without cause? He that tarries long at the wine. Bashing yourself into walls and tripping down steps till the point where your body from the head to the feet is full of nasty pussy sores. And that's in a way where we are today. Is it hopeful? Is there hope? Absolutely. But not until we have the ability to go and clean up the sores, and put some nice medicine and cover them up and let ourselves be healed from ourselves, which is where we come in. Because it's a government of, for, and by the people. We don't participate in the form of government that was instituted by the Creator, then we will fall. Because according to the Declaration of Independence, the Lord Creator instituted government among men in order to preserve the very liberties that He so generously endowed us with. That's grace. So wouldn't it therefore reason follow that if the Lord Himself instituted a government among men and that we say that we believe Him, that we would therefore by default be involved in the same form of government that He created simply to protect the liberties that He gave us? Let's start looking at things from a biblical perspective. And a lot of these debates that we have about whether believers should be involved in politics will graduate from them. And we'll find a way to participate in the process of protecting our own liberties, which we have abrogated to the point where we have come close to losing them. And you talk about being delivered from evil. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. We, friends, were delivered from evil. And tomorrow is an inauguration anniversary. We're going to have the conference on the 1-year anniversary of the inauguration of our current president. What a nice way to commemorate the last year and also to look forward. So let's pray about finding shalom in the midst of the storm, and instead of being afraid of the storm, rush into it. Now here's where we are, friends, and anybody recognize this place geographically? By the way, is there any way we can dim some, maybe, of the lights? That helps a little bit, doesn't it? Boy, ask and you shall receive, right? This is Gibraltar. So the question is, friends, where in the ship of state that we are in, that USS Constitution, which way are we sailing right now? Into the shallows of the Mediterranean or out into the broad blue sea of the Atlantic? Well, let's hope we're going out into the broad blue seas of the Atlantic, right? But that's a perilous transit, isn't it? Many enemies. Remember Gollum? Many. And by the way, the mountain called Gibraltar, it's actually, its real original name is Jebel Tariq. Jebel is mountain, Tariq is the leader of the Moors who crossed the isthmus or the Straits of Gibraltar in the year 711 and went all the way up to the plains of France by the year 732. Another great moment in history when Charles Martel, the Catholic king of the Holy Roman Empire, stopped the advance of the Muslim armies in the middle plains of France. 100 years to the exact day that year that Muhammad died in Saudi Arabia. So the question is, how did they get from way over there on the other side of the visible horizon to the plains of France in 100 years? Because Islam was a religion of peace? No, if we were alive then and CNN and Fox News was we were watching every day, imagine your entire lifetime, longer than anybody here has lived. Well, let's just say that we were of the generation when the Islamic armies were moving across North Africa. Every single day, or at least every single week, we would be hearing about another ISIS-like event where another city in North Africa was demolished down to the ground and the people were slaughtered and killed and taken away into slavery. For 100 years, it was unrelenting warfare. And then they jumped across into Europe. And if it had not been for Charles Martel in the plains of France, they would have gone all the way to Scandinavia. And no one would have been able to stop them. The Lord does intervene in the affairs of men. Amen. He stretches the rubber band out so much farther than we think or imagine it could be stretched out. But he does intervene in the affairs of men. Do you believe that? Amen. And if that is true, then why does he intervene in the affairs of men? Because he has a purpose, doesn't he? There's a design to history. History is just like a symphony. Things happen on the beat of music, time, just like the bass and the drum and all the other instruments that are in the chorus of a symphony orchestra. They are precisely choreographed, and history will be seen, I believe, from an eternal perspective like a symphony. That things happen in an exact, precise moment. Not arbitrary, passive, but deliberate and intentional. The Lord is in the middle of the affairs of men. When the moment came when that jet hit the north wall, north tower, in the microsecond, which at light speed, by the way, many things can happen in a microsecond. At the moment that the nose of that plane touched the face of the north tower, whatever the world was before then was never the same again and never will be again. When the moment came when the man who was leaning over the side of the ship in the Boston Harbor took the box of tea and let go of it, and the moment when gravity took over, the world was never the same because there was no certainty of outcome with those guys. They did it in broad daylight in front of the British fleet, knowing that it was a provocative act. But they risked all and their sacred honor. And history changed. I'd like to make a movie someday of this box of tea falling at super slow motion and poof into the water. And some other events in history at slow motion, and then weave that together into how we came to where we are today. So Shakespeare was, of course, he was famous for his ability to describe things so beautifully. There's a tide in the affairs of men which, taken at the flood, leads on to fortune. Omitted, however, all the voyage of their life is bound in shallows and in miseries. On such a full sea are we now afloat, and we must take the current when it serves or lose our ventures. That's where we are, friends. 2018 is going to be a turning point year. You're basically going to see whether your fellow countrymen are going to help push this country to the finish line and continue the process of recovering ourselves, or we're going to boat ourselves back into slavery again. You will see it. But please don't let yourself be passive in the process. Because here's the thing about it I learned when I used to send memos up the chain of command. Was I expecting a response? No. Is that the reason why I sent the memos up? Because I was sitting there wringing my hands, waiting for the phone to call? That somehow somebody would wake up and they would intervene and help me? Or was there another reason why I sent those memos up the chain of command? There was. Because it was the right thing to do. Why did I send the memos up the chain of command? Because despite the fact that they were not going to respond, I put it into the historical record. And when the members of Congress asked me, well, Mr. Haney, did you do something? Did you notify your supervisor? Yes, sir, I did. In fact, here's the memo I wrote on February of 2014, outlined this, and this. Did you respond to you, Mr. Haney? No, sir, they did not respond to me. Pause, comma for effect, as we say in law enforcement. A moment. When they say wow, and then they have to decide what are they going to do next. But I did the right thing. And that's what we're all faced with. And this is where we need to graduate into the wisdom of God. Because what we're actually doing by obeying Him and following His lead is that we're leaving a legacy. And that the effect you have on the generations and the families that you're a part of will have consequences that will go on for decades after. And that your grandchildren 20 years from now, or 10 or 5, or wherever we are in the time sequence of time, will ask you, Papa, Mama, what did you do back in 2017 and 2018 when things were, looking back now? How in the world did you guys ever let it get that bad? But B, what did you do, Papa? Well, honey, I wrote this letter, or I did this. Really, Papa? You still have a copy of it? Yeah, let me go see if I can find it in my files. Well, here it is right here. Wow, Papa, you really did that. I want to be like you when I grow up. Or, well, honey, it was really tough back then, kind of scary times, and I just decided I wasn't going to take any risk, and I wasn't going to get involved, and I just didn't do anything. Really, Papa? I don't want to be the one that says that. I want to leave a legacy that will be inspiring. And that's the point, friend. That's the paradox of the world that we're in. That we live in the world, but we're not of it. We can't base what we do based on an expectation of a response from people who are so blinded they don't know their left hand from their right hand. You have to do what's right in the sight of God and trust Him for all the rest of it, no matter what. Period. So what are we fighting for? Sovereignty. I know we say we're fighting for the American way of life. Some will say we're fighting for the Constitution. You can also tell me what you're fighting against, right? Each one of you, if I was to ask you to write a little paper on a paper, what are you fighting for, or what are you fighting against, you would tell me. But fundamentally, when you drill down to the bedrock of the issue, what we're actually fighting for is sovereignty. We're not even really fighting for the Constitution, and I mean that in this sense. The Constitution is a legal brief describing the liberties that the Lord endowed us with. All it does is point to a more fundamental concept called sovereignty. And why is sovereignty important? Because people have the right to choose the form of government that they live under. And then when you realize that the global Islamic movement under Sharia has a definition of sovereignty that they want to impose on us, they don't recognize our endowed form of sovereignty and the legal brief that describes it, called the Constitution. To them, that's an invalid document. And the progressive leftist Antifa side of the equation also has a definition of sovereignty that they want to impose on us. And ironically, it's all found in the Declaration of Independence, which says it is the right and duty of the people to alter or abolish the current form of government and to replace it with one that they find more suitable. In fundamental terms, isn't that what the Islamic world is trying to do? Is impose the sovereignty of Sharia on the entire world? And in fundamental terms, isn't that what the progressive leftist movement is attempting to do? Is impose by force if necessary, compulsion, coercion, and legal means, a form of sovereignty because they consider the Constitution to be racist, outdated, and biased. So ironically, they're doing exactly what it says in the Declaration of Independence, except for they're not abiding by the self-evident truth of the structure of our government, which is instead of a fivefold ministry, it's a threefold ministry: legislative, judicial, and executive. Like a pyramid. But it's an upside-down pyramid. It's inherently unstable because it requires one more part, and that is us. We are the ones that provide the stability for this spinning top of our government, which if we don't provide the stability to, will flop over and spin across the floor. And that's exactly what we've been seeing, isn't it? Each one of us has a part to play. The structure of our government is of, for, and by the people. We are the ones that provide the stability, you might say the gravitational force, to allow that spinning top of our instituted government to function correctly. It's very delicate. But if it's allowed to operate the way it's intended, it can do near miracles. However, if it's not functioning correctly, it leads to tyranny and slavery, abuse by corrupt men. There are 3 arenas that you can operate in, and each one of you will identify with one of them in particular. They're like the rings of the Olympic flag. They do overlap, but they're yet simultaneously distinct. The social arena has a flashpoint, a catalytic flashpoint. It's the immigration reform battle. After all, aren't we told that immigration is for our own good, to increase diversity and inclusion, etc.? And that if we oppose it, that we're racists? That's operating in the social arena. Some of you are going to be focused on that in the weeks and months and years ahead. There's also the political arena, and the flashpoint for that one is the alliance with Israel. Why that one? Because it goes back to sovereignty. In fact, they all go back to sovereignty. The right of one country to establish their relationship with another country without being told by the rest of the world that they have no right to put their embassy where they choose to put it, which in this particular case happens to be the city of Jerusalem, which now superimposes upon our civil form of government a prophetic sense of urgency. See why America is so unique. Do you realize, friends, that the president, by recognizing the capital of Israel as Jerusalem, has set us up for a gigantic blessing? Because what does Genesis chapter 3 say? Those that bless you and curse those who curse you. And what would be one of the most beneficial forms of blessing that we could be endowed with by the fact that we're recognizing the everlasting covenant, and that we're synchronizing, we're merging in with the flow of history, and that we're seeing it in the way the Lord sees it? What would be a great blessing? To find, well, that would be part of it. But where does the revival begin? Within the house of God. But also, don't leave out our secular political form of government, which, by the way, is saturated with biblical values. But if the government is going to be fixed, where does it have to come from? Inside out. And that will be President Trump's legacy, because he's taking us back to a recognition of the checks and balances form of government that our country was founded on. And yes, is it like washing sausage being made? Is it infuriating and exasperating? Yes. However, rather than intervene and usurping the process, he's allowing it to unfold the way it was meant to unfold. And rather than usurping the power of the judiciary and just unilaterally enforcing his will on the immigration executive orders, he allowed it to go through the circuit court and then to the Supreme Court, where he won a 7-2 victory. Now, which one is better? Intervention or let the process go all the way through? And maybe as time goes on, people will start getting the message and will dispense with some of this ridiculous ceremony and just get to the issue at hand. And he will set a precedent for that. You see what I mean? And the last one is in the law enforcement arena. That's where I kind of come from, although I've kind of morphed into a political person lately, is the designation of the Muslim Brotherhood as a terrorist organization. And that's the catalytic flashpoint for that arena. And what I mean by that is that up until and when those three main flashpoint issues are actually dealt with in a constitutional manner, you will know that we are still in conflict. These are the flashpoints of the battles: immigration reform, alliance with Israel, and our MB designation in each one of the three major arenas that were addressed, what should be addressed by the threefold ministry of our government. See how it works together. And that's another place where you're part of. This is what I call saturation. You know, we're worried, we're led to believe the only real threat we face is from this group far, far overseas called ISIS. But the thing about the Muslim Brotherhood, this is my expertise, is that they saturate. They don't attack and destroy, they soak in from underneath. And if we are a sponge and we're floating around with about 200 other sponges in a big pool of water the size of this room, what's the natural physical thing that's going to happen between the sponge and the water? The water's going to want to soak into the sponge, isn't it, from the bottom up? Every sponge is a little different, isn't it? And so some are already super saturated, while others not so much. Meanwhile, if you're dissatisfied with the length of time it's taken for the water to saturate into the sponge, what you're going to do is push on it from above to make it happen faster. That's terrorism. The Muslim Brotherhood are saturators. Terrorists push from above. So here's the real point of the allegory. How do you waterproof the sponge? You can't take it out of the water because that's the world that we live in. So how do you waterproof the sponge and keep it from being super saturated with toxic water? Constitution. It's a stronger defense against saturation than a physical wall. If we build a physical wall, but we don't recognize the threat that's within already, will the physical wall help us, protect us? Maybe a little bit, but not to the level that they would expect it to, right? Especially if there are no watchmen on the wall. That's also an area that's changing for the better too, is the guys, my colleagues, Customs and Border Protection, Immigration and Customs Enforcement and Border Patrol, through a memo that then Secretary Kelly, now Chief of Staff Kelly, wrote in 20th of February, basically took the handcuffs off and the blindfolds off and are letting the agencies now do their job at a level we hadn't seen in about 10 years. Lots of reasons, friends, for hope. Don't get distracted by the noise. There's a lot going on behind, ignore that man behind the curtain. No, pay attention to the man behind the curtain. And here's another allegory about wisdom and discernment. There's a water bottle. Here's a different one. And there are three things. I'll drink a little bit of it. More space. There are three things in this water bottle. I'll give you a hint. One of them is water. So what are the other two things that are distinct from the water that are in the water bottle? This is an allegorical exercise in seeing what is right in front of you. This is what intelligence is. This is what essentially counterterrorism is. So what is another thing besides the water that's inside that bottle? Good. 2 out of 3. What's the third one? Has nothing to do with the water or the air in any sense whatsoever. It's completely distinct from both of them. What is the other thing that's in the bottle? Remember, it's a lesson in seeing what is right in front of you. That was the hint. How do you see? Light. There's light in the bottle. If there weren't, it would be a black image in space. So now I would venture to say that you will never look at an ordinary water bottle again the same. Because every time you get one and put it in the holder in your car, you're going to think about the illustration. That's what intelligence, and that's what intelligence is, just a secular word for discernment. Aren't we called to be discerning? Yes. So aren't we called to see what is there, that is hidden, if you will, the mystery? By the way, when we see through the glass darkly, let me pause. I don't want to go on so long that people get too tired. So whoever is the timekeeper, let me know when appropriate time. Because actually, once you pull the string on me, I can just keep going for days. I have so many stories. I would like to come back at the end of the year, and I would like to hear you tell me some stories about what you've done in the year 2018. But I could literally almost stand here for a month and tell you all kinds of amazing things, because I've been given and endowed with a great gift, and that is the right and privilege to travel around the country and talk to people in America. And what I'm unique is I was inside the government for 15 years. And I was a founding member of the Department of Homeland Security. I saw it all myself. Just like Luke. Inasmuch as many have attempted to put in order the things that we have seen, O Theophilus, I thought it good that I would give an account, because I was a first-hand witness of it. And I happened to be at the site and see it actually happen. The most severe breaches of constitutional responsibility that we've had since 9/11. Boston bombing, San Bernardino shootings, Orlando. I sat next to the guy that ran the Hezbollah case that you're hearing about, Operation Cassandra, that was shut down. Literally right next to him. And the advanced targeting team at the National Targeting Center, what I call the secret squirrel headquarters of DHS. That's where I worked. And so I had that privilege to see like flashes of lightning, and I essentially had the equipment to capture those split-second illuminated images and put them into my little notebooks that I was telling you about earlier, and captured history, friend. Meanwhile, because I paid a great price to buy that pearl, and the Lord gave me the grace to maintain my integrity through it all and survive it, then He granted me the privilege of going out on the road and seeing the rising up of the groundswell across the country in the lead up to the election. I was in Omaha, Nebraska, the night of the election, and now I'm going to be in Marion, Ohio on the anniversary of the inauguration, right in the heart of our country. This is where I like to be. I spend plenty of time up in the head in Washington, and one messed up head it is. So every once in a while, or as often actually as possible, it's nice to get out, because it's a great honor and privilege to go around the country. And there's no such thing as small or large in God's economy. We have to also graduate from that and disabuse ourselves of the notion that it's only me and there's only so much I can use. We should ban that word. Take it out of our vocabulary. There's no such thing as only in the kingdom of God. There isn't. Because one man can put a flight 1,000. 300 can defeat an entire army. And I got to see it, friends, from both sides of the coin. After being blasted and pounded on and thrown in the fiery furnace for 10, 15 years, I got the chance to go out on the road and see my fellow Americans actually gain enough wherewithal that despite all the odds and the predictions from Huffington Post that Hillary Clinton had a 98% chance of winning the election, that Donald Trump woke in the morning, America woke up. What's the starting of our national anthem? Oh, say can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming? It's a question. You ever thought about that? He's asking a question. What are we going to see in the morning when we wake up? When the dawn breaks, what flag will be flying over Fort McHenry? Will it be the red, white, and blue stripe, or will it be the Union Jack? And the whole country, and Baltimore in particular, was fixated on what flag would be flying in the morning when they could finally see through the intermittent bursts of cannon fire. And lo and behold, against all odds, it was the American flag. The Americans fought the British fleet to a standstill, because if you've been there, you know that in front of the fortress there are 50,000-pound cannons, big enough to stick your head into the hole. I know because I did it. I wanted to see. And on each side are batteries of 20,000-pound cannons. They're as big as telephone poles. Big, fat telephone poles. Almost as big as all these wind machines you guys got out here. They're something, aren't they, those wind machines? Anyhow, it wasn't a passive fight. It was a stalemate. The British had to stay out of lethal cannon range, so they parked offshore and lobbed the shells in, hoping that the Americans would just give up, but they didn't. And that was a turning point in history. So, seeing what's right in front of you is the same difference, or it's the same thing as intelligence and or discernment. Water, light, and air. So how do we recognize the things that are right in front of us? When it says that we see through a glass darkly, somebody has their phone and they want to look up the Greek word darkly, you're going to be amazed to find what it actually is. It isn't the word darkly. Enigmata. What does that mean? We're looking into the enigma, the mystery of eternity. We have been gifted with the capacity to see into eternity, which gives us the hope that lies before us to endure the eclipses that we go through when we're here in this world we live in, trapped in time in these bodies until we're transformed into His image, which meanwhile the Holy Spirit is intending to do within us, to transform us into the image of Christ, so that when we see Him, we will be like Him. And we have the capacity to see that through that window over there. It's not darkness, where things fade in and out of shadow and fade in and out of focus. It's not that. It's the enigma of eternity that we're actually able to see. And that gives us a tactical advantage in the warfare, because we know where the bad guys are. But we also know where the kingdom of God is too, because on that distant hill we can see it. Right, huh? So the water bottle. So we're called to be warriors. Do any of you feel like this sometimes? I do. I put that on my bio sheet. That picture. I just love that picture. That's one serious individual right there, isn't it? And then here's what we are, friends. It's a beautiful picture. You know what the word soterios means in Greek? But if you're doing it, you're called a soterion, someone who brings salvation. A person who brings soterios is a soterion. And that's what we are. And why does it say, how beautiful upon the mountains of the feet are those that bring good peace, good tidings? Why? Because if you're dying with an arrow through your shoulder on the battlefield in pitch black, with rounds going off all around you because the enemy is trying to really kill you, what is the first thing you're going to see when somebody walks up to you and leans over and says, I've come to save you, and picks you up and carries you off the battlefield? That's the picture we see here. The man in the helmet is a soterion. To the man who's been wounded, that's his brother. And we pick these people up and we carry them off the field and we put them in R&R and they get healed up. And then what do? They get fitted with the armor of God and they go back into the battle. And it says that your light, your word is a lamp unto my feet. When I was first a believer, I used to have this picture of groping your way through a darkness area. Because you realize Satan's kingdom is a kingdom of darkness. And we are trespassing. We're not authorized to enter his kingdom. We are not permitted. But we have been authorized by the creator of the universe, amen, to ignore the trespassing signs and go into the battlefield, which is all done, friends, in darkness. That's why we need the armor of God. If Paul was alive today and he described the modern armor of God, it would be night vision goggles, Kevlar vests, amen, shoulder-mounted RPG, grenades, M15, and bandoliers of ammunition. And you could take tank rounds at point-blank range like Iron Man and withstand it. But we don't grope our way through the battlefield holding a flashlight out in front of us. If we do, and the enemy is already zeroed on, what's going to end on us? What's going to happen to our poor arm? It's going to get shot off, right? As soterion, as healing warriors, by the way, that's what that word means. Nice concept, huh? Where does the light come from? From inside out. We are illuminated creatures, shining light on this dark battlefield. Of course the enemy can see us. He can see us from 50 miles away. And here comes the tank rounds, the 50 cals, bouncing off of you while you go in and pick these people up and bring them out. That's what we're called to. Isn't that a glorious calling? And if you think about the bride of Christ, if men can be the bride of Christ, then I guess the girls can be the sons of God, right? Think about when a woman is going to be married, all you see with her is hair flying. That's the way I put it. There's a girl on the move. And nothing can distract her. She's one seriously dedicated individual. All you see is her moving with her hair flying behind her. That's the soterion. That's the bride of Christ. Who wouldn't want to marry a woman like that? That's femininity in its most concentrated and beautiful form. The woman with the sword and the armor of God, valiant, standing for her beloved and the kingdom that she represents, capable of bringing salvation to people that she encounters. Now that's the image of the bride of Christ. I just put this up because it's Hebrew, and by the way, the word for salvation over here in the highlighted part is Yeshua. You've heard that name before, right? You know that the nature of God is past, present, and future. You've thought about this? I am, I was, I will be, the first and the last, the Alpha and the Omega. And you know that the name of God, the four-letter name, often said Yahweh, is the verb to be. And that it is a derivation of the verb to be, which implies that the nature of God is to be simultaneously past, present, and future. And when you take the first letter out of the name of God and attach it to a verb like shava, which means salvation, supernaturalizes the verb. It enhances it like in a nuclear way and bursts it right into eternity. And there's an individual called Emmanuel who is Yeshua, which means the self-existent God who created the universe, has become salvation and dwells among us. All of those concepts are embedded in the name of Jesus. Jesus means Yahweh Shua, the Lord will save. And he reached his hand down into the visible world, Emmanuel, and dwelt among us. But he's the eternal God. Salvation. If the Spirit of God abides within us, he will bring to remembrance all that he's taught us. That's past. He will also lead us and guide us into all truth. That's present. And he will show us things to come. That's future. And whatever combination of those attributes that we need at any given time is exactly what he will give us. That's the nature of the Holy Spirit, which is an exact reflection of the nature of God himself. Meanwhile, superimposed upon that concept is the concept of existence, to be or not to be. The meaning of God has meanings of the verb to be, but also the concept of existence itself compressed together like a nuclear-powered atom. And when you take that and attach it to a verb, supernaturalizes the verb. The word for atmosphere in Hebrew is rakia. You ever thought about what it means when it says that the Lord divided the waters from the waters and created the atmosphere, firmament? At first it was all water, and there was no light on the surface of the earth. Because that's why at first, if you read it, it says, "Let there be light," twice. So he created the universe, but the earth is void and without form. Tohu va bohu, which is still an expression in modern Hebrew. Your room is a mess. It's tohu va bohu, void and without form. Okay, you have this earth where the Spirit is hovering upon the face of the deep, and darkness is covering the face of the deep. Then the Lord divides the water from the water and creates what we now call the atmosphere. And as soon as he does that, the photons from the sun that were there all along suddenly illuminate the noble gases mixed in with the atmosphere, and bling, let there be light. That's exactly what happens to us. Haven't you ever thought about when you see guys out in space that is pitch black? Then how is it that the light that you don't see, which is still there, suddenly illuminates the earth? That we are floating in black space. So what is it about the earth that is illuminated? The atmosphere, i.e. the Spirit. When the Holy Spirit comes into us, it does exactly the same thing as the sun does with the atmosphere around the earth. Let there be light. We are illuminated. After all, we came from the earth, and everything that the Lord does is a reflection of that initial creation. Pretty compelling concept, isn't it? Next time you see a picture from space, I hope you remember that that's an illustration of who we are. Floating in the blackness of space is this beautiful illuminated dwelling place that he created for us. So we're going to go from spiritual warfare into natural side of the equation, because the life we live is like a coin, a head and a tails. The spiritual side and the tails side, if you will. I have a joke, I'm bilingual. I can speak secular and I can speak spiritual. So if you want to, now should we pause now, or are we good to go? What should we do? Yeah, I think so. I mean, it'll be enough, yeah. Article 1, Section 1, right off the bat, we have this phrase in the Constitution. the legislative branch, the powers of Congress. Remember I told you about the three arenas? Okay, I'm going to allude to that. This would be in the social arena. To establish a uniform rule of naturalization throughout the United States. Is there anything about that language that's difficult to understand? And we could put in parentheses today, including California. To provide for calling forth the militia to execute the laws of the Union. That's radical, isn't it? And to suppress insurrections and repel invasions. The actual primary responsibility of the federal government is to prevent invasions by foreign power and outbreaks of domestic violence in the states. Did you know that? That it's actually the duty of the federal government to prevent outbreaks of violence, civil violence in the state. So here's part of the weapons of our warfare from this side. This is just one of many cartoons trampling on free speech and burning down the Constitution like over in the corner. And this is just an issue a illustration. By the way, I'm going to make these PowerPoints, whatever I do end up showing during the time that we're together between now and Sunday, available. So not only will you have it on a video, however you're maybe doing the video there, you'll have it as your own reference. You can go back, because all the citations and links are here. And you can walk yourself back through it. So anyway, we found out from the U.S. Southern Command that 30,000 individuals crossed the southern border that were from countries called SIC, Special Interest Countries, meaning Middle Eastern. And those are the very same countries that President Trump put in his executive order from the very start that we're trying to prevent from coming into our country. And our own elected officials opposed him every step of the way. That's an abrogation of constitutional duty. I basically say that our poor countrymen are in a spasm of collective psychosis. And we are. We're addicted and drunk. We're inducing injuries like the man I was telling you about, crashing into walls and tripping over the steps and breaking his arms and hurting himself, staggering about because we've lost our coherency. But I have a lot of hope that we're going to recover ourselves from that. Again, we're talking about immigration, one of the three arenas. The next one is Article 4, Section 4. The U.S. shall guarantee every state in this union a republican form of government and will protect each one of them against invasion and against domestic violence. Have we seen outbreaks of domestic violence? It's the federal government's duty to prevent that, not to enable it and encourage it, which is what was happening in the last administration. I'm just pointing these things out, friends, to give you a double-sided perspective. Instead of looking at everything with one eye, we'll have binocular vision, and I debated this fella, Alex Nowrasta, in California on November 13th of 17. First time this school, California State University at Channel Islands. It's in Ventura County where I was born. I'm almost 65, so it was very surreal to go back to the place I was born and have a debate at this college. The first debate they ever held with following Oxford rules, and we actually managed to get the entire debate with no interruptions. And it was all kids, I say kids, 20, college kids. My position was based on constitutional fact. His was based on political correctness. He said there should be no border and that drugs should be legalized because they are victimless crimes. Anyway, I'm supposed to debate him again in March in Washington, D.C. So we'll see how that one goes. But the kids came out of the room thinking maybe those conservative Republican old fogey kind of guys aren't so bad after all. Yeah. So to me, that's a victory. And by the way, this is really the point. This is what I found in the student union. Undocumented student information. Well, there's a red flag right there. But Look at paragraph 1, 2, and 3. The CSU, California State University, will not enter into agreements with state or local law enforcement. You realize that they're forcing the law enforcement officers who took a vow to violate their oath of office and putting their own careers at risk by simply doing their job? That's preposterous, Mr. Haney. They wouldn't tell you to delete records out of the system. They wouldn't tell you to look the other way while terrorists were coming into the country. Yes, they would. And they told me if I don't do it, that I would suffer the consequences. And they took it all the way to the extreme of convening a grand jury to find probable cause to indict me on criminal charges for trying to enforce those laws right there, to keep terrorists from coming into the country. They said I was violating their civil rights and civil liberties, and that I was violating their privacy rights. The university police will not honor immigration hold requests. You realize what they're doing? They're forcing these people. So now Sessions and Kirsten Nielsen is going to go after some of these people and serve them with injunctions, which is exactly what they need to do. Enough already. This thing needs to be stopped. California voted itself a sanctuary state. January 1st. Here's this AG Sessions targeting sanctuary cities. You talk about arraying forces. There's forces being arrayed right here in our country that have the power of a tank, meaning a constitutional tank. And they are going to crash that tank through some of these walls pretty soon. Just keep your ears out for it. Here's another one, debts, supremacy, and oaths, just mainly down the bottom half. Under the authority of the United States shall be, the Constitution is the supreme law of the land, and the judges in every state shall be bound thereby. Have we seen examples of judges in states not being bound by the Constitution? We have. But more fundamentally, why is Sharia law illegal in the United States? Because of Article 6, Paragraph 2. According to its own definition, Sharia law is superior to all man-made forms of law, including the Constitution. Therefore, by default, according to Article 6 of the Constitution, Sharia law is illegal. Well, what about the First Amendment? Well, what's the last half of the phrase, First Amendment? Okay, what's in an amendment to? The articles of the Constitution. Does that mean that the amendment supersedes the articles, or does that mean that the amendment is built on top of the self-evident principles that are embedded in the articles? The latter. The First Amendment doesn't trump the Article 6, it's the other way around. Whatever freedom of expression and religion that you have has to be built on the foundation that the U.S. Constitution is the supreme law of the land. Otherwise, you veer toward anarchy. Well, we have a religion that's anti-constitutional. No, you don't. That's illegal. Fortunately, we're biblical people, and we realize that the Constitution is saturated with biblical values. It is. So again, there should be no really inherent conflict in being involved in the political arena. If that's where you're called to, it's not a violation of your faith. After all, there's no other document that's ever been written in the history of the world that is more saturated with biblical principles. We hold these truths to be self-evident. That we are endowed by our Creator with certain unalienable rights, among which are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That's biblical. You can attach a verse to almost every single one of those words. It's biblical concepts translated into a secular setting. And that's our job, friends, is to operate and translate biblical principles into the secular setting, quote-unquote secular, that we live in. That's our job as ambassadors of the coming kingdom. This is, anybody seen this before? You know what that is? Okay, anybody know what a TDY is? We're going to all be on a TDY now. You're all on the intel team. You're just being reassigned to Washington. This is the first day, and I'm going to be your program manager for the new team project, and I'm going to ask you to do a first level analysis on what you see here. So what do you see here? What? So how do you know it's the Quran? That's a really good hint. You can't just make declarative statements, which, by the way, friends, is one of the things that I've learned as I've traveled around. People that I call the Constitutional Alliance tend to make declarative statements that they can't prove because they feel it and they're pretty sure it's right. But when they're really pushed against the wall into the thlipsis place, they can't prove their assertion. And they lose in debates. And that's our greatest weakness, is we don't have command of the language, and we're being ruled by Humpty Dumpty. Words mean exactly what I want them to mean, no more and no less. They are the ones that control the definitions of the words. That's why every time you get close to them, they change the meaning of the word, and suddenly you're committing some form of social crime. You just violated a law that didn't exist 5 minutes ago because they just changed the definition of the word. And you violated the law. Now you're guilty. So what we need to do is take that channel changer away, the clicker, and change it to a new channel, constitutional channel. And this is going to be your homework assignment aside from this, and that is that at whatever position that you take from now on, when you operate in the secular arena, either political, social, or law enforcement, you have to be able to cite chapter and verse from the Constitution, whatever position that you're taking. Whatever argument that you're making, whatever premise that you put forward has to be based on constitutional principle. And that's why I'm trying to set an example here by showing you some of the constitutional principles. Don't you feel that with the confidence you gain by mastering the language of the Constitution, that you're going to also become more competent? Confidence engenders competence. And you become immovable. And I'm not even talking about the X factor, the magic herbs and spices of the power the Lord gives you. I'm only talking at the intellectual level of mastering the language of the Constitution, if in fact you intend to be involved in one way or another in this challenge that we're facing. So yes, it is a Quran. Okay, what else do you see? 2 crossed swords. So what is that supposed to mean? Why not one sword? Or on the other hand, why not a sword and an olive branch? Well, what the 2 swords mean is enforcement of Sharia law internally and promotion of Sharia law externally. Because the objective stated as by this picture, by this image, is to implement Sharia law everywhere in the world. By the way, when you see it flat, turn around, look real quick for North America. Here it comes. You see an X across North America? Exclusion zone, no-go zone? No, we're not immune or excluded from the intent of the purpose of this image. All right. We already talked about the earth itself, that there are no exclusion zones. So what about the writing? You think that's important, or should we just ignore it? Like my government, our government told me to do. Those words have no meaning. You're not even allowed to discuss the meanings of those words. Otherwise, the Muslims might get offended that you even mentioned it. That's Orwell, friends. So what it means from the right, right to left is, the first side on the right says Al-Ikhwan. That means the brethren. On the left it says Al-Muslimun, which means of Islam, the brothers of Islam. Does that remind you of a big group? Muslim Brotherhood. How about the word down at the bottom? Think that might be important? I mean, if they took the time to put it in there, do you think there was a reason for it? Or was it just kind of accidental? They just liked the look of it. Well, what it says is Wayauda. It means prepare. So what's your natural question going to be? So glad you asked that, as they tell you to prepare to terrify your enemies and slaughter them in battle. This is from Quran Al-Anfal, chapter 8, the spoils of war, verse 60. The most violent chapter in the entire Quran, chapter 8, Al-Anfal, talks about spoiling and plundering the property and wealth of the unbelievers in jihad warfare. You think the Muslim Brotherhood didn't know that? Now, if according to Obama administration this is a peaceful organization, then what, pray tell, would a violent one look like? Superimpose an atom bomb over the picture? And this, whatever the form or type of strategy directed against the enemy, it must, in order to be effective, be capable of striking terror, turhibuna, into the hearts of the enemy. There's no such thing as terror in the Quran. Islam is a religion of peace. Sorry, Charlie, you're wrong. The word turhibuna means terrify, and it's in the Quran, chapter 8, verse 60. The very same verse that this Wayauda, prepare to terrify your enemies, is drawn from. That's what we call in law enforcement a clue. And this phrase comes from, I would like to encourage anybody that's really interested in this particular aspect to go look and get from Amazon the book called The Quranic Concept of War. It's by S.E. Malik. He's a Pakistani who wrote a very concise briefing on the Quranic references, the references in the Quran to warfare. So, this is the image of the Muslim Brotherhood, the largest Islamic organization in the world and the parent of every Salafi, pro-Sharia, jihadi group that exists in the world today. It is the parent of all of them. ISIS, al-Baghdadi, the Sheikh Imam of ISIS, was a 7-year-old prodigy. Probably a lot like Paul. Paul was a prodigy. He was sent from his home in Tarsus to learn to become a rabbi under the great rabbis of the time in Jerusalem. He was multilingual. He was a genius. But he was a misguided genius, wasn't he? Until he got knocked flat on the road to Damascus. Ever wonder what the heck was Paul doing anyway in Damascus? It's a foreign country. It wasn't part of the Commonwealth of Israel. Why was he even there? And why did he care if Jewish people were following the Messiah in Damascus? Why did he feel like he had to go get them? It says he was breathing out threatenings and slaughter. What would that look like in modern language? Somebody that's breathing out threatenings and slaughter. What does that even look like? It looks like a guy with an AK-47. The bandana that says Hamas. He looks like a jihadi because he was one. So this is the Muslim Brotherhood, and he was going to drag these people back and throw them in jail. And if some of them died along the way, oh well, too bad. That was Paul. And remember the zealots? Some of the disciples were zealots. Guess what the word in Arabic for that is? Hamas. Here's Jesus. He's walking along the road, and he sees this guy. He's an obvious fearsome fellow. Walks right up to him, and he says, "Come and follow me." To al-Baghdadi, the leader of ISIS. He does it. That's power. And that's what Jesus did. His disciples were jihadists, some of them. They were zealots. They were Sicarii. They were assassins with knives. Barabbas was on trial in prison because he killed Romans. knives. And they do it today, don't they? The modern day zealots are called jihadis. The roles have been reversed. Now the Muslims are the zealots of the Bible time. And the environment is just as dangerous as it was during Jesus' time. He literally walked right up to people and said, "Come and follow me." He did it. And this is just an illustration. This is like the water bottle. This is an image of a person where there is no light. See? We don't know the identity of that person. What can we tell? Likely female. But other than that, it's pretty darn hard to tell. What we call in Intel the 5 W's. Who, what, where, when, and why. Although if you're good at analysis, you can figure out where this was taken. And you certainly can tell what the word is in blue behind it. It's Hamas. In the West Bank, near Beit Sahur. I was wearing flip-flops and a stinky 3-day-old t-shirt and shorts, drinking tea out of a tin can with olive wood carvers in Beit Sahur. And he looked and he said, "You know, Hamas is moving into our neighborhood and we could help the Americans." And I'm just telling you what he said, but they're too stupid to know it. And that was more than 10 years ago. The handwriting on the wall. By the way, was it a hand writing on the wall? Or was it handwriting on the wall? I think it was a hand, right? That's the handwriting on the wall, friends. If you know what you're looking for, you see it. Because we are supposed to have discernment, aren't we? This is the, by the way, if you want to call your congressman, you guys have a good one. I mean, Steve King, I don't think he's in your district, but nonetheless, you can look it up on the web. H.R. 377 is the House bill, Senate Bill 68, the Muslim Brotherhood terrorist designation. They've tried 4 times now since 2014 to get it onto the floor and pass, and each time failed to gain momentum. Congress is afraid to designate the Muslim Brotherhood. That's the last stronghold of those 3 arenas that I pointed out to you. And now you see what I mean, right? The battleground, the catalyst, they haven't even addressed it yet. Did I? No. This is by Diaz Balart from Florida and Ted Cruz. Ted Cruz on the Senate side. Did you see my hearing before Ted Cruz? 28th of June 2016, called The Willful Blindness. It was the first time in history that people talked about the threat of Sharia law before Congress. 2 days later, Ted Cruz asked Jay Johnson to come in, and he asked Jay Johnson, "Do you know Philip Haney and his claims about deletion of information from the database?" "No, I don't know him. I wouldn't recognize him if he walked into the same room." "Well, have you taken the time to look into his claims?" "I told you I don't know him, and no, I haven't taken time to look into his claims." "Well, would you be concerned about them if they were true?" "No, not really, because it's really a discussion about semantics and labels." This was the Secretary of Homeland Security. If you were making claims and you were a federal employee with counterintelligence, secret clearance, and wearing a gun for a living, made the claim that the U.S. government is deleting information from the law enforcement database, and you were the Secretary of Homeland Security, what would be your job? What would be your primary responsibility? To tell the federal government, Congress oversight, that you haven't even bothered to take time to look into it? That's what you call obscene hubris. No, you would say, "Yes, sir, I recognize that it's a serious issue. We will look into it and we'll get right back to you on that right away. We'll give you a briefing." That's what you would do. And then you would go back to your office and you call your team and say, "Go find out about this Haney guy. Either if he's not right, if he's not telling the truth, then pound him into the ground. Get him out of the agency. But if he is right, then we need to address it, don't we? He didn't do either. So that's a pending issue, friend. We're talking about battlegrounds, remember? And this is one of the earliest iterations of the executive order. It's called Protecting the Nation from Foreign Terrorist Entry into the United States. Did I ever finish telling you that the Southern Command said there were 30,000 SIC individuals that crossed the border in 2015? That's 10% of the 315,000 that crossed. Where do those guys come from? Maybe they came from the Hezbollah guys that were smuggling cocaine and laundering money that my friend in CBP was running the case of in 2011 and 12, that now we just found out that the Obama administration shut down so that he could make sure he had a nice clean slate for the Iranian nuclear deal. Maybe they came from those guys. They did. Or maybe they came from the tri-border area. Or maybe they came from the Panama Free Trade Zone. Or maybe they came in on counterfeit passports from Venezuela. They did, and they did. Because it's all interrelated. And that's the abrogation of constitutional duty and what I read to you, that it's the federal government's responsibility to prevent foreign invasion and outbreaks of domestic violence at the state level. You think drugs cause domestic violence? And here's the law that was embedded into the executive order. There's nothing in this language that's hard to understand. It gives the explicit right of the president, the executive branch of the government, to prevent entry, suspend the entry of all aliens or any class of aliens as immigrants or non-immigrants, and impose on the entry of aliens any restrictions he may deem to be appropriate. He has a complete legal authority to do what he did. But what happened vis-a-vis the Fifth Circuit and the Ninth Circuit? They stopped it, didn't they? They never addressed this law. They said that based on statements that President Trump made during the campaign, that he was a racist and he had abrogated his ability to implement his executive authority because he was biased against a race of people. That's the decision that they made. You're disqualified from your office because you're a racist. Forget about the law. Let's see if we can let me go out here, because I do think we're close time-wise. And I can go through some of this later, meaning tomorrow and the next day. But let's end up with a couple good things real quick. Here's a point in history, friends. It's going to have major dramatic implications in the days, weeks, and months ahead. The designation or the recognition of the capital of Israel as Jerusalem. Because it's in line with the everlasting covenant, which I think I'll talk about while we're here. What is the everlasting covenant? And we alluded to it earlier. I don't think I finished my point. If the Lord will bless those who bless Abraham and Israel and curse those that curse him. And now we have now a leader who recognizes that enough to make the declaration and send the entire world into a frenzy of rage. Then what would be the possible blessing the Lord would endow upon us? Discover a gas field under Marion, Iowa? Maybe. But more likely, would you agree that it could be that he's going to deliver us from evil? That he's going to deliver us from the evil that are the consequences of this self-induced injuries that the world is going to bring upon itself. And that he will keep us from the full consequences of that. You think that's a plausible possibility? I certainly do. So that's something to be thankful for. And here he is giving the address when he unveiled the national security strategy on the 18th of December. Isn't that a nice picture? Our government's first duty is to its people, to our citizens, to serve their needs, to ensure their safety, preserve their rights, and defend their values. Absolutely 100% Constitution. Did you see that on CNN? They were probably talking about one of his tweets. Well, you know what tweets are? Moving pawns. What he's doing is moving pawns, and he's distracting these people while he's putting knights, rooks, and bishops into play, and they're not even seeing the moves. They're distracted by the pawns. I consider it really brilliant what he's doing. So let me think here. Let's finish up with my favorite saying of Abraham Lincoln in his second address to Congress in 1862, that the dogmas of the quiet past are inadequate for the stormy present. Do you agree with that? What are dogmas? Ideas, concepts, policies. And the occasion is piled high with difficulties, that's for sure. But we must rise with the occasion. As our case is new, so we must think anew, and we must act anew. We must disenthrall ourselves. We must. And then we shall save our country, the last best hope on earth. Wouldn't you agree that we need more statesmen to speak like that in such a time as this? And that I, for one, intend to give it my all between now and November, and to see if whether our country will disenthrall themselves and continue on the path back to a threefold ministry of government, or we will vote ourselves back into slavery again. And that's basically the two alternatives. So I'm in all the way till November, and then we'll reconvene and see where we are at that point. Any questions? Are we going to have questions, or are we going to wait? Okay, yeah. Just if you have a question, write it down. Did you anybody read the book where we talked about shorthand? Yeah, I do. When I was in high school during the Vietnam War era, my dad told me, Philip, I want you to take typing in shorthand. Okay, Dad. I thought he told me that because I was a nerd, and I was a nerd. And I was, a student, so he figured it would help me in college. Way long time later, I found out the real reason why he told me that. It wasn't that at all. It was so I would have clerical skills if I got drafted. But, come to find out, I took the shorthand like a duck takes the water. Or they say in the South, a duck on a June bug. I'll tell you how much of a nerd I was. I was the only boy in a class with 17 other girls, and I never went out on a date with one of them. But boy, did I learn shorthand. My pace of speech right now, not counting the pauses, is around 100 to 110 words a minute. I could take shorthand in 110 words a minute. And if you read in the book, you'll read there's a couple places where I talk about it, where I'm sitting in front of people that are interrogating me or giving me a real hard time, and I'm writing everything they're saying down right in front of them in shorthand. And it's really weird looking. I admit it. It's strange looking. They'd get distracted. They'd keep looking down at what I'm writing, and they'd find they couldn't take it anymore. Haney, what are you writing? I mean, what is that you're writing down? I'd look right at them and say, everything that you're saying. Now what are they going to do? And when I sat in the meetings when I was at NTC where I talk about the federal government coming in and shutting down the Tablighi Jamaat case, I was in the meeting, and I wrote it all down in shorthand. When I was at FLETC, they had a big union debate about overtime and collateral duty assignments. I was an instructor at the Federal Law Enforcement Training Academy. We got all in a room about this size. There was probably about this many people in the room, and there was management and there was us, and we were going at it. Really, in fact, a couple of them nearly got in a fist fight. You get a bunch of cops in the room arguing, and those kind of things can happen. But here I am sitting in the literal middle of the room and writing every single thing everybody's saying down. And then I went back to my office and I transcribed it while it was still fresh and created this 25-page document, which then I turned around and sent out on the listserv to everybody who was in the meeting. And you can imagine the indignation and the fury of management. Who gave you authority to do that? We all have the authority to do that. They were astonished by it. Well, I gave the document to my colleague who had initiated this meeting. They had filed a grievance against the federal government for unfair labor practices, and they won the case. And I just saw him 3 days ago. And he says, I said, I want you to have this. This is an archive, an artifact of history. You keep it. And he said he still has it to this day, locked away in his safe. This weird-looking pages of squiggly writing. But so it came in real handy, shorthand. And it allowed me to document some of the things that I saw along the way. So, by the way, this is an optical illusion. Those lines are not crooked. Those crooked lines are not crooked. Like I'm doing a Jedi mind melt. Those crooked lines are not crooked. I don't care how hard you try to tell your mind to make them go straight, they won't. However, if you take and put something, see if this will work. No. Hold a ruler up to the lines, and you'll see they're straight. And the point of it is an optical illusion. Don't be misled by what you think you see, but use the plumb line of the Word of God to keep you safe in a crooked, perverse generation, and you will not be misled. Okay? Thank you, everyone.